It was a quiet evening in Charleston, South Carolina, the kind of calm that feels borrowed. I was carrying folded laundry up the stairs when my son rushed down, blocking me halfway. His face was pale, his voice firm but trembling. He said I didn't need to come upstairs, that everything was fine. But the air behind him felt heavy, too still, too secret. I set the basket down and listened. And that's when I heard it. A voice, faint but clear, drifting from above. It wasn't a stranger's voice. It was mine. If you're watching this, please like, subscribe, and stay. Because what happened next still chills me. The house had always been quiet at night, but that evening, the silence felt alive, like something was listening. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, a basket of folded clothes pressed against my chest. The lamp in the hallway cast a thin line of light across the first few steps, and everything beyond that was swallowed in shadow. I could hear my son's footsteps above, heavy, hurried, uneven. When I called out, he didn't answer right away. Then he appeared at the top of the stairs, breathing fast, his shirt slightly wrinkled, eyes darting behind him before they found mine. He looked like a man caught between guilt and fear. His voice tried to sound calm, but it broke halfway through as he told me not to come upstairs. He said it twice, the second time sharper, like a warning. Something in the way he said it made the hair on my arm stand up. I'd raised that boy. I'd heard his voice in every tone life could give, laughter, anger, sorrow. But this tone was new. It wasn't defiance, it was dread. He started walking down the steps, almost too quickly, one hand gripping the rail. When he reached me, he smiled, a strange, tight smile that didn't reach his eyes, and took the laundry from my hands. I watched his fingers tremble as he set the basket down, as if the weight of something invisible pressed on him harder than the folded shirts inside. He mumbled something about work, about stress, about being tired, and moved toward the kitchen. His movements were mechanical, like someone playing the role of normal instead of living it. I stayed at the bottom of the stairs long after he'd gone. My eyes traced the banister, the old oak steps, the faint dust that shimmered in the lamplight. The air smelled faintly of detergent and something else. Something unfamiliar, a scent that didn't belong to either of us, a mix of perfume and metal, maybe. It lingered, teasing, then vanished as if swallowed by the walls. I told myself it was nothing, but mothers know. I turned off the lamp and headed to my room, but sleep never came. I lay there listening to the sounds of the house settling, the ticking of the clock, the soft creak of the ceiling, the distant hum of the refrigerator. Then, sometime past midnight, I heard it again. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, crossing the floor above me. The same rhythm my husband once had, heavy on the right, softer on the left. My breath caught. My husband had been gone for years, his room sealed, his memory packed away in photographs. I told myself it was my son moving around, restless, sleepless. But then the floorboards stopped creaking, and another sound followed. A faint humming. At first, I thought it was the television left on low volume, but it wasn't music. It was a human voice, a woman's voice. Familiar, too familiar. I sat up, my pulse racing. The sound was soft, like someone speaking through the floor. Not words, just a tone, the kind you use when you hum a lullaby while folding clothes. It grew clearer, steady, rhythmic. Then the words came through the air vents, low and muffled, but distinct enough to make my blood run cold. The voice was mine, not similar, identical. The pitch, the breath between syllables, the gentle southern drawl that I'd carried all my life. I froze, my mind scrambling for reason. I must have left a voice message playing somewhere, I told myself. Maybe an old recording on the phone, maybe a video clip. But I hadn't touched anything. My phone was beside me, dark, silent. The voice continued for a moment longer, then stopped abruptly, as if it realized I was listening. The air went still again, so still that I could hear my own heartbeat. I waited. Nothing. At dawn, I got up, still in my nightgown, and walked to the hallway. The light from the window at the top of the stairs spilled down in a pale stream, washing the wood in silver. Everything looked ordinary. Too ordinary. My son's door was closed, locked from the inside. I stood there, hand on the banister, debating whether to knock. Something in me said, "Don't." Instead, I turned and went to the kitchen. The kettle hissed. The morning sun crept through the blinds, and the world outside began another day. Birds chirped, cars passed, neighbors watered their lawns. Everything normal, except for the echo still ringing in my mind. My own voice calling out from somewhere I hadn't been. Later that morning, as I set breakfast on the table, I watched him walk in. His face looked drawn, tired, his eyes red at the edges. He muttered a good morning without looking at me and poured himself coffee. The silence between us stretched thin. I wanted to ask. I wanted to say, "What's upstairs?" But the words stuck to my throat. There was a time he told me everything. Now it felt like every conversation was a wall. He left early that day, saying he had errands. When the door shut behind him, the house sighed into quiet again. That's when I noticed the faint scent drifting down the staircase, a mix of lavender and old wood, the smell of my perfume. I hadn't worn it in weeks. Something was up there. I stood at the base of the stairs again, same as before. The house around me silent as a held breath. The light above flickered slightly, as if something moved past it. I placed one foot on the first step. Slowly, carefully. The wood creaked under me. I paused. Then faintly, too faintly, came a whisper. Not words, just a sound. Then another. It was my voice again, soft but clear, saying the same thing I had said to my son every night for 20 years. "Dinner's ready." My heart pounded so loud it drowned the rest. I gripped the railing and leaned forward, staring at the closed door above. That's when it hit me. The memory of him standing there, his eyes wide, his tone trembling, saying I didn't need to go upstairs. I had thought he was hiding something terrible, something shameful. But now, hearing my own voice, I wasn't sure what scared me more. That he was lying, or that he was telling the truth. The sound faded. Silence swallowed it whole. I stepped back, slowly, the chill creeping up my arms. The hallway light flickered again, then steadied. Everything looked normal. Only my reflection in the hallway mirror betrayed the truth. Pale face, trembling hands, eyes wide with disbelief. That night, I slept with the lamp on. Every creak of the house made me flinch. Every shadow looked like it carried sound. By morning, I told myself it was imagination, exhaustion, grief twisted into illusion. I tried to believe that. But when he came downstairs again and told me, too quickly, that I didn't need to do any cleaning upstairs, the fear returned. His hands shook when he reached for his coffee. His eyes refused to meet mine. And then, faintly, from above, as though the house itself had lungs, came a whisper again. My name, my own name, spoken the way I say it when introducing myself. Calm, familiar, and female. I froze. He froze. The cup in his hand stopped mid-air. For one terrifying moment, The world held its breath. Then, as if nothing happened, he forced a laugh, said it must have been the television. But I knew the truth already. The sound hadn't come from a screen. It had come from the room he didn't want me to see. That was the morning I decided to wait, to listen longer, to watch more closely, to collect the quiet pieces of whatever truth lived above my ceiling, because that voice wasn't a haunting. It was a secret, and secrets always have faces. The house sat on the edge of a quiet street in Savannah, Georgia, where moss hung from the oak trees like slow green rain. I'd lived there for more than 40 years, long enough to memorize the sound of every floorboard, the sigh of every door. Life had always moved gently inside those walls. Morning coffee, folded laundry, the smell of lemon polish on wood. My son and I shared that home after his father passed, two people bound by grief and habit, learning to fill silence with small things. At first, the days felt safe. We spoke over breakfast, shared small jokes, planned weekend repairs. He worked long hours at a company downtown, and I kept the house alive, cooking, cleaning, humming to the radio. The rhythm was predictable, comforting, almost sacred. But slowly, something shifted, subtle as dust collecting in sunlight. He began staying out later. The light in his room stayed on through the night, spilling a faint line under the door. I'd pass by with a basket of towels and hear the low hum of electronics, maybe his computer, maybe the television, and tell myself not to worry. He was grown now, busy, tired, entitled to his own quiet. Still, part of me missed the sound of his laughter drifting down the hallway, the easy way he used to talk. Some evenings, he ate alone, leaving his plate in the sink, apologizing with quick smiles that never reached his eyes. He said he was working overtime, that projects were piling up. I nodded, believing him, because mothers want to believe. We build excuses like soft blankets over hard truths. Then came the little changes. His door, once half open, stayed closed. The phone calls he used to take in the kitchen now happened behind that door. He stopped bringing friends around. When I asked if he wanted dinner, his answers grew shorter. One-word replies, polite but distant. I told myself it was just the weight of adulthood. But deep down, something felt unsteady. The house no longer exhaled warmth. It breathed caution. Every sound carried meaning. A drawer opening, a lock turning, footsteps at odd hours. The dog barked one night toward the stairs, fur bristling, eyes fixed upward. Nothing moved there, yet the air felt disturbed, like heat after lightning. The next morning, I noticed a second coffee mug on the counter, one I didn't own. It had a chip near the handle, the kind of flaw you remember. I asked him about it, casually, pretending not to care. He said it belonged to a coworker who had stopped by. His voice was steady, too steady. He looked past me, not at me. Later, while dusting the living room, I found a hair on the armchair. Long, pale, not mine. I held it between my fingers for a moment, the way you hold a thread you're not sure you want to pull. Then I let it fall. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe grief still made ghosts of the living. Night brought more questions. I would wake to the faint creak of the staircase, soft steps moving up or down. I couldn't tell. Once I thought I heard whispering. Quick, nervous, like someone speaking to calm another. When I opened my door, silence swallowed the sound whole. Days turned into weeks. My son's behavior grew stranger. He began avoiding eye contact altogether, brushing past me in hallways like a shadow late for somewhere else. He locked his room even when showering, and when I asked why, he said it was habit from work. I wanted to believe that. I really did. I tried to bring back normal. I baked his favorite pecan pie, set it on the counter, waited. He thanked me, but didn't eat it. The pie sat untouched for 2 days until I threw it away. The smell of sugar turned sour, heavy, stale, like something once sweet losing patience. One afternoon, I walked by his room and heard a faint sound, not voices this time, but a low recording. Static, broken, rhythmic. I knocked lightly, asked if everything was fine. The sound stopped. He opened the door a crack, enough for his face, not his eyes. He smiled again, the same hollow smile, and said he was fine. Then the door closed, the lock clicked, and I stood there staring at the paint on the frame, chipped where his father once leaned. I started noticing how often he stared at the staircase, how his shoulders tightened when I walked near it. He'd look up quickly, then away, as though expecting something to appear there. Sometimes he positioned himself between me and the stairs, subtle but deliberate. I convinced myself it was grief, that maybe he was haunted by his father's absence the same way I was, but the way he moved, cautious, protective, fearful, didn't feel like mourning. It felt like guarding. Every morning, I swept the porch, watered the plants, and watched neighbors walk their dogs. They'd wave, ask how I was, and I'd smile, the kind of smile that hides more than it says. Inside, the house felt heavier each day. Even the clocks ticked slower, as though time itself hesitated. One evening, while folding clothes in the laundry room, I heard footsteps overhead again. Slow, deliberate, dragging slightly. I called his name, expecting a reply. None came. I waited. Then came the creak of a chair, the sound of something shifting weight. I held my breath. After a long minute, silence returned. Later that night, he came downstairs, eyes red from lack of sleep. He made coffee at midnight, hands trembling slightly as he poured. I asked if he was okay. He said he was, that he'd been watching old videos to help him sleep. Then he added something strange, that sometimes voices helped calm him down. I wanted to ask what kind of voices, but he was already walking away. The next morning, I found the back door unlocked. It wasn't like him. He was meticulous, almost obsessive about security. I locked it, but unease stayed. The unease grew heavier when I found a second toothbrush in the bathroom cabinet. Blue handle. Not mine. He started coming home later, but the upstairs light always came on before he entered the house, as if someone else turned it first. The thought chilled me. Once I stood outside in the driveway, looking at that light through the window. It flickered once, then steadied. I almost called his name, but stopped. I didn't want to sound afraid in my own home. Weeks passed this way, quiet meals, locked doors, half-truths. I told myself he'd come to me when he was ready, but the distance between us widened like cracks in glass. Each day, I caught my reflection in those cracks. An old woman pretending everything was fine. I began cleaning rooms I'd already cleaned just to stay busy. The house was spotless, yet it felt dirty somehow, tainted by secrets too thick to wash away. Every sound made me flinch. Even the air conditioner startled me when it clicked on. Then came the night when the power went out during a storm. Thunder rolled across the roof, shaking the windows. In the flash of lightning, I saw a shadow on the stairs. Thin, still, human. I called his name. No reply. I lit a candle and climbed 2 steps. The shadow moved, then vanished. When I reached his door, I heard him breathing on the other side, quick and shallow, like someone caught in a dream. I whispered through the door, asked if he was all right. His reply came seconds later. quiet, measured. He said he was fine, that I should go back to bed. But his tone wasn't his. It was empty, flat, as if rehearsed. When morning came, sunlight returned, but comfort didn't. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the ceiling. Somewhere above me, faintly, I heard the creak of the chair again. I told myself it was just the wood contracting in the heat, but I didn't believe it. By now, I'd memorized the rhythm of that house too well to mistake coincidence. The air upstairs was thicker. The silence up there wasn't ordinary. It pressed down on the rooms below like a secret too heavy to hide. I began writing in a notebook each night. Every noise, every scent, every glance. Not because I planned to accuse him, but because I needed proof that my mind was still sharp. Grief blurs memory. Fear rewrites it. I wanted to keep the truth somewhere safe before it got twisted. Some mornings I would find him sitting at the table, staring into nothing. His hands rested flat, motionless, as if waiting for permission to move. He spoke little. Sometimes his lips moved without sound. Once I heard him whisper my name under his breath, not to me, but to the air. When I asked, he smiled again, that same smile like a curtain drawn over something dark. The day before everything changed, I found him in the hallway, staring at the attic door. The string that opened it dangled above his head. He looked up, then turned to me, startled, as if I'd caught him doing something forbidden. He said he was checking insulation, but I noticed the key in his pocket wasn't for the attic. It was for his room. That night, I couldn't sleep. The rain outside tapped against the window in uneven rhythms. Around 2 a.m., I heard soft movement upstairs again. Not heavy footsteps, but the light tread of bare feet crossing the floor. Then came a sound like a whisper caught in static. I held my breath and listened. The words were faint, broken, almost drowned by the rain. But I recognized them. They were my own. The same phrases I spoke every day. Good morning. Did you sleep well? I love you. For a moment, I thought I'd lost my mind, that grief had finally learned to speak. But deep down, I knew better. Silence has a voice of its own, and that night, it was speaking through him. The morning light in Savannah always came slow, sliding between the blinds like liquid gold. I used to love that hour, the way it warmed the kitchen tiles and made the coffee smell softer. But lately, the light didn't comfort me. It only showed how still the house had become. The quiet wasn't peace anymore. It was distance wearing a disguise. I noticed the first change one Sunday when I set the table for breakfast. 2 forks, 2 plates, the way I'd done since he was born. When I turned around for the orange juice, another plate sat on the counter. Same pattern, same size, but I hadn't taken it out. I asked myself if I'd forgotten, if age was playing tricks on me. I wiped the counter, placed the extra plate back in the cabinet, and told myself it was nothing. But small nothings build into something heavy. That week, the air upstairs began to carry a faint perfume, one that didn't belong to me. It floated down each morning, sweet and unfamiliar, like lilac mixed with iron. It clung to the stairwell, to the banister my husband built years ago. When I dusted, it came back on my hands. Every night around 10, I'd hear the same pattern of footsteps above my room, slow pacing, then a pause, then something soft dragging across the floor. Sometimes a thud, sometimes a sigh. I learned the rhythm the way you learn a song you don't like, but can't stop hearing. The dog wouldn't go upstairs anymore. He used to nap by my son's door, loyal as sunrise. Now he'd stop halfway up the steps, growl low, then retreat with his tail tucked. Dogs sense what people pretend not to. On Tuesday, I washed laundry early. When I went to hang shirts in his closet, I saw a second coat on the hook. A woman's coat. Pale beige, faint makeup stain near the collar. It wasn't new. It had been there a while, pressed between his suits. My breath caught, but I said nothing. Maybe he was seeing someone, I thought. Maybe that was all. But if that was all, why hide it? Later that day, I cooked his favorite, fried chicken with collard greens, and waited. The food cooled. The clock ticked. Midnight came before his car lights painted the driveway. When he entered, his clothes smelled faintly of rain and perfume, not smoke or bar air. He ate in silence, thanked me quietly, then carried his plate upstairs instead of to the sink. The next morning, I found crumbs on the stair carpet and 2 glasses in the sink. One had lipstick smudged near the rim. I ran the water, washed them both, and watched the color swirl away. My reflection in the window looked tired, smaller than I remembered. I tried to convince myself this was normal, that he was lonely, that maybe someone was keeping him company and he was afraid to tell me. But the unease grew thicker each night. One Thursday evening, I went to water the plants in the back garden. The upstairs window was open. Curtains moved slightly in the wind. Then I heard laughter. Light. Quick. A woman's voice. I froze. It lasted only a second, but it was real. When I looked up again, the window closed. That night at dinner, he spoke softly, eyes on his plate. I told him the azaleas were blooming early this year. He nodded, but didn't really hear. His mind was elsewhere. Up there. I caught him glancing toward the ceiling twice. When he realized I noticed, he forced a smile. The same smile that said, "Don't ask." A few days later, I was vacuuming the hallway and found a hairpin near the bottom of the stairs. Silver. Delicate. Shaped like a leaf. It glittered in the light before I picked it up. I didn't wear pins like that. I slipped it into my pocket and kept cleaning. The house began to feel divided, upstairs and downstairs, truth and pretending. I started moving slower, listening more. Each creak, each click became a sentence I tried to read. At night, when the city went to sleep, faint sounds drifted down again, muffled talking, then silence, then what sounded like humming. Once I heard something fall, a dull thud followed by a whisper that sounded like apology. My hand shook so hard the glass of water I held trembled. Morning brought polite normalcy again. He left for work at dawn, returning late. But sometimes, when I walked by his car, the passenger seat was adjusted too far back, like someone taller had been there. The more I noticed, the less I slept. I would sit in the living room armchair watching the staircase, half expecting someone to descend. The house had new habits now. Lights flickered in patterns I hadn't set. The old clock upstairs ticked again, though it hadn't worked in years. Once, while folding laundry, I heard music from a radio that didn't exist. Faint, distant, cut off mid-song. I began writing notes to myself. 2 plates again. Footsteps at 1:23 a.m. Perfume stronger tonight. It wasn't paranoia. It was proof. Proof that I wasn't losing my mind, that something real breathed above me. Then came the incident with the laundry basket. I'd left it at the top of the stairs while I answered a call. When I returned, it was halfway down, tipped over, shirts spilling like ghosts across the steps. No window was open, no draft strong enough to move it. The house felt alive, but not in a kind way. It was holding its breath. On Saturday morning, I noticed muddy footprints near the back door. 2 sets. One small, one larger. Both fresh. My son said he hadn't gone outside since last night's rain. He said it without blinking. I nodded, pretending to believe him, even as my chest tightened. That evening he came home earlier than usual. He looked tired, hollow. I asked how work was. He said fine, then went straight upstairs. Minutes later, I heard soft footsteps again. 2 pairs this time, moving quickly. Then silence. By then, I'd stopped denying what I already knew. There was someone, or something, upstairs. But fear has a strange patience. It doesn't push you to act until the moment you can't bear not to. It happened 2 nights later. I was reading in bed when I heard a sound. My own name, whispered faintly. I froze. It wasn't his voice. It was higher, fragile, almost identical to mine when I speak softly. The words came again, clearer, as though someone was practicing saying them. My name, my tone. I turned off the light and listened. The whisper changed to humming, then stopped. Silence again. The next morning I walked into the kitchen and found 2 teacups drying by the sink. Mine and another with a chip on the rim. I hadn't made tea for 2 in years. I sat down, heart pounding, trying to make sense of it. The voice, the perfume, the laughter, the extra dishes. Each clue was a thread pulling me toward something I didn't want to see. I began to realize the truth wasn't waiting in the dark. It was walking above me in daylight. I decided to test it. That afternoon, when he left for work, I sprinkled a bit of flour across the upstairs landing. It was an old trick my grandmother taught me for catching mice or ghosts. Either way, tracks tell stories. That night, before going to bed, I glanced up the stairs. The flour gleamed white under the dim light, smooth, untouched. At dawn, when I checked again, there were footprints. 2 sets. Bare feet. I felt the ground tilt beneath me. Fear has a weight, and that morning, it sat fully on my chest. I wanted to call someone, a neighbor, the police, anyone, but shame stopped me. What would I say? That my son might be hiding something upstairs? That I was hearing my own voice echo from rooms I wasn't in? People would call it grief, loneliness, delusion. And maybe they'd be right. But mothers know when something's wrong with their home. That day, I made breakfast and left it on the table. He came down late, hair damp, avoiding my eyes. I asked if he'd slept well. He said yes, too quickly. Then he noticed the flour still dusted on his slippers. He looked at me, saw my gaze, and smiled a thin, brittle smile that broke before it reached his cheeks. He brushed past me, grabbed his keys, and left. When the door closed, I stood alone in the kitchen. The light through the curtains made the flour footprints glow faintly on the floor like ghost trails. I followed them with my eyes until they disappeared at the stairs. That was the moment suspicion stopped being fear and became certainty. Something was living inside my house that shouldn't have been there. Maybe flesh, maybe memory. Either way, it had my voice. Morning in Savannah carried the smell of wet earth and magnolia. The storm from the night before had passed, but the sky was still heavy, the kind that makes the air thick enough to taste. I was ironing clothes in the living room when I heard the floor above creak again. The same slow rhythm. I stopped mid-press, the hiss of steam filling the silence. For weeks I had lived with half-truths, whispers, footsteps, the ghost of my own voice. That morning I promised myself I would stop pretending. I folded the shirt carefully, placed it on the pile, and started up the stairs with the laundry basket against my hip. Halfway up, I heard him call my name. His tone was sharp, urgent, the kind of tone that comes from fear, not irritation. His footsteps thundered down, fast, reckless, echoing off the narrow walls. Before I could take another step, he was standing in front of me, one hand gripping the rail, the other reaching for the basket. His breathing was uneven, his eyes darting from my face to the top of the stairs. He said I didn't need to come upstairs. His words came quick, too quick, like he was trying to build a wall with them. I froze, watching his throat tighten, the tremor in his jaw. He took the basket from me and set it down, his hands shaking slightly. I could see the sweat gathering near his temple even though the house was cool. The fear in his eyes wasn't anger. It was panic. The kind you feel when you've already lost control of the lie you built. He stood there, trying to look calm, but his shoulders betrayed him. They trembled every time the floor above creaked. I noticed how his eyes kept flicking upward, how he swallowed hard before forcing a smile. That smile was thin, fragile, something people wear when they're begging the world not to notice what's cracking behind it. I tried to step around him, but he shifted quickly, blocking me again. It wasn't aggression, it was desperation. His body stood like a guard, but his face looked like a confession waiting to happen. For a moment, we just stared at each other, mother and son, two lives that used to mirror one another, now split by secrets that filled the air like fog. He said again that I didn't need to go upstairs. The sound of his voice trembled. I didn't argue. I just nodded slowly, pretending to agree, but my heart was pounding. Behind him, the hallway light flickered once, faint but noticeable. His eyes darted toward it instantly. Whatever was up there had his full attention. And his full fear. He tried to steady himself, wiped his hands on his jeans, and said something about the pipes leaking or a mess he'd clean later. I didn't respond. I just kept looking at him, waiting for the truth to show on his face. It almost did. It hovered there, heavy in his eyes. But he caught it before it escaped. Then, without another word, he picked up the basket, turned, and walked toward the laundry room. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, every sense awake. The house was silent again, except for one faint sound from above. A soft shuffle, like someone moving slowly across the carpet. He pretended not to hear it, but his hands froze on the laundry basket handle. I noticed his knuckles go white. He whispered something under his breath. Not to me, to himself. Maybe a prayer, maybe a warning. When he walked past me again, the smell of lavender perfume brushed by. The same perfume I'd noticed for weeks. The one that didn't belong to me. It lingered in the air between us. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't ask whose it was. I didn't have to. His silence had already told me more than words could. He went out to the yard soon after, pretending to check the mail, pretending there was nothing strange inside this house. I stood by the window, watching him pace the driveway with restless hands. He kept glancing at the upstairs window, his movements uneven, anxious. Every now and then he stopped completely, as if listening for something I couldn't hear. Then he'd start walking again, faster, like running from his own thoughts. When he came back in, he avoided me entirely. He walked straight to his room, locked the door, and stayed there. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at the stairs. The sun moved across the floorboards, turning morning into afternoon, then into the gold haze of evening. The house remained silent, but silence has a sound if you listen closely. It hums, almost like breathing. That day, I heard it coming from upstairs, soft, slow, familiar. As night fell, I set dinner on the table. He didn't come down. I knocked once, lightly. No answer. Through the thin wood, I heard movement, then quiet again. I waited an hour, maybe two. Finally, I left his plate covered with foil and went to bed. Sometime past midnight, I woke suddenly, unsure why. The house was dark except for the glow of the hallway lamp. I could hear rain tapping softly on the roof, the kind of rain that comes with no thunder, only rhythm. Then, beneath that rhythm, another sound emerged. Faint whispering, just like before. My breath caught. I turned toward the door. The whispering wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from above. I got up, each step careful, slow. The floor was cold under my feet. I stood at the bottom of the stairs again, same spot as that morning. The whispering continued. Low, hesitant, like someone trying to remember the shape of words. Then I heard it. My name. Not shouted, not spoken, normally. Whispered in the exact tone I use when comforting a child. My voice. My cadence. My breath between syllables. I froze. My pulse thudded in my ears. Every part of me screamed to run, but I couldn't move. The voice came again, softer, almost tender. Then it changed. It began repeating small phrases, familiar ones. Dinner's ready. Good night. I love you. The same things I'd said to my son every day for years. Tears blurred my eyes before I realized they'd come. I clutched the railing, unsure if I was hearing the living or the dead. The house seemed to tilt around me, the air heavy with something unspeakable. Then, as suddenly as it began, the voice stopped. Silence fell like a curtain. I stood there in the half-light, shaking, until the quiet became unbearable. I took one step up, just one. The wood creaked under my weight, echoing into the stillness. From above, I heard movement, quick, startled, like someone retreating. Then the faint click of a lock turning. My heart sank. He was awake. He knew I'd heard. I turned back, went to my room, and sat on the edge of the bed until dawn. The lamp stayed on all night. I didn't sleep. When morning came, I heard his door open. His steps were cautious. He came downstairs, hair unkempt, eyes red. He saw me sitting there and froze, guilt written all over his face. I didn't speak. I just looked at him, waiting for him to say something. Anything. He finally muttered that he hadn't slept, that he'd been listening to podcasts upstairs. Maybe that was what I heard. But his voice trembled. His hands wouldn't stay still. And behind him, the light from the top of the stairs flickered once more. That's when I saw it clearly. Fear, raw and unfiltered, sitting deep in his eyes. He wasn't afraid of me. He was afraid for me, afraid of what I might find if I climbed those stairs. He walked to the door, said he was heading to work early. As he turned the knob, I noticed his reflection in the window. Pale, drained, haunted. He looked like a man holding a secret too heavy for his age. When the door closed, the silence returned, thick as fog. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty staircase. The air above shimmered faintly in the sunlight, as if the house itself was holding its breath. That was the day everything changed. Because that morning, when he told me not to go upstairs, I finally understood. He wasn't protecting himself. He was protecting me. Night came quietly, sliding into the house like a secret. The air felt thick, almost damp, holding on to the heat of the savannah day. Outside, the cicadas hummed in the trees, their song blending with the distant rumble of traffic. Inside, the house was too still. Every shadow felt awake. Every silence sounded like a held breath. I sat in the living room for hours, pretending to read, but my eyes never touched the words. The clock ticked louder than usual, as if counting down to something I didn't want to see. I told myself I wouldn't go upstairs, that I'd respect his warning, But my body didn't believe my mind. Some part of me was already listening for the thing that had stolen my peace. By midnight, the moonlight had moved across the carpet, cutting the room into silver and black. The air smelled faintly of rain again. I thought of my husband, how he used to say that nights like this made memories walk. I didn't understand what he meant until that moment, when memories no longer felt like pictures in the mind, but voices in the air. The house creaked softly, a whisper of old wood shifting with the wind. I closed my eyes, hoping the sound would settle. But then it began again, the faint hum I'd heard before. At first it was so quiet I thought I'd imagined it. Then it grew clearer, threading through the air like smoke. It came from upstairs. I sat frozen, my pulse echoing in my ears. The hum turned into a soft murmur, then into something almost like speech. I leaned forward, straining to catch it. The voice was low, muffled by distance, but the cadence was unmistakable. It was my own. I heard myself, my exact tone, my rhythm, my breath between words, saying something ordinary. Dinner's ready. Don't be late. My heart clenched. It wasn't the words that scared me. It was the way they sounded. Familiar, but hollow, like a recording played too many times. I held my breath and listened again. The voice continued, repeating fragments of sentences I'd spoken countless times in that house. Good morning. Are you hungry? I love you. Each phrase landed like a ghost touching my shoulder. I stood up slowly, legs shaking, and took a step toward the stairs. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence behind me. The air grew colder. Another voice joined in. His voice, faint but pleading. I couldn't make out the words, only the tone, sorrowful, desperate. Then, suddenly, a sound like metal scraping against wood. I froze halfway up the first step, hand gripping the railing. My mouth was dry, my pulse too loud. From the top of the stairs, I could see a faint sliver of light leaking from under his door. It flickered slightly, like candlelight, though I knew no candles were there. I whispered his name before I realized I was speaking. The moment my voice left my lips, the voice upstairs stopped. The silence that followed was so thick I could feel it pressing on my chest. Then came the sound of a chair moving, slow and deliberate. Footsteps. One set. Pacing once, twice. The floor creaked above me, then went still. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, afraid to move forward or backward. The air was heavy with tension, with grief, with something I couldn't name. Then, faintly, the voice came again, but closer now, as if standing right behind the door. It said one sentence, clear and calm. My sentence. I'm proud of you. My blood ran cold. Those were the same words I used to say to him after his father died, every time he got through another day without falling apart. I had said them hundreds of times, but never like this. Never from the mouth of an echo. I gripped the railing tighter, trying to breathe. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I didn't cry. Fear and heartbreak blended into one strange stillness. I wanted to open that door, to tear the truth from whatever hid behind it. But I also knew, deep down, that the truth might change everything. So instead, I stepped back down the stairs one at a time, my body trembling. When I reached the bottom, I turned off the hallway light and stood in darkness. The voice continued upstairs for a few seconds more, softer now, like a lullaby. Then it stopped altogether. I sat in the kitchen until morning, staring at the window where dawn would soon appear. My reflection looked hollow, ghost-like. Every time I blinked, I saw his frightened face from earlier, the way his voice cracked when he told me not to come up. At sunrise, the house looked innocent again. Sunlight touched the curtains, the kettle hissed softly, and birds sang outside like nothing had happened. He came downstairs looking pale, his hair damp, his eyes shadowed. I wanted to ask what I'd heard. I wanted to tell him that I wasn't losing my mind. But when he sat down and muttered good morning, I saw his hands trembling as he reached for his coffee. The sight of it stopped me. There was guilt in every movement. His spoon clinked too loudly against the mug. His gaze avoided mine. And for the first time, I noticed the faint outline of headphones in his pocket. He finished his drink quickly, then grabbed his keys. As he passed by, I caught a faint echo again, my voice, coming from the small speaker upstairs. Just a whisper. "Take care." He flinched. I saw it. The muscles in his shoulders tightened, his breath hitched. He turned the knob and left without another word. When the door closed, I walked back to the stairs. The silence now felt almost alive, waiting for me. I climbed slowly, one step at a time, the old wood groaning under my feet. The air smelled faintly of dust and lavender, that same lingering perfume. When I reached his door, I listened. Nothing. I placed my hand on the doorknob, cold metal against warm skin. My heart raced. Every instinct screamed to open it, but I hesitated. Then, from somewhere inside, a soft click, like a switch. Then another sound, faint static, like an old cassette being rewound. And then, my voice again, repeating the same 3 words. "I love you." I stepped back, my breath catching in my throat. That was when I realized this wasn't madness or haunting. It was imitation. Someone, or something, was replaying me. That thought shook me more than any ghost could. I turned and walked back down slowly, one hand on the railing, each step echoing through the house like a clock ticking down. I sat in my chair until morning came again, too afraid to sleep, too awake to rest. When daylight filled the windows, I made a decision. I would wait until he left for work. Then I would unlock that door and see for myself what lived upstairs, because no mother deserves to fear her own voice. The morning came pale and silent, the kind that hides heat behind mist. The street outside shimmered faintly in humidity, but inside, everything was still. The air carried that same faint perfume, lavender and dust, drifting down from upstairs. My son had already left for work. His car engine had faded into the distance half an hour ago. I waited longer, just to be sure. For weeks, fear had followed me like a shadow. That morning, it turned into resolve. I walked through each room quietly, the way one does before leaving a house forever. The coffee cup on the counter still held the ring of his last sip. The chair by the window sat angled slightly away, as if someone had stood quickly and never returned. I moved toward the staircase. The light through the curtains painted stripes across the steps. Each one creaked softly under my weight, like a warning whispered by the house itself. My hand traced the railing my husband had built years ago. Smooth wood, worn down by time and touch. When I reached the landing, I paused. His door waited at the end of the hall, closed, locked, patient. I slipped the old key from my apron pocket. I'd found it days earlier in the kitchen drawer, buried under receipts and forgotten buttons. It belonged to the spare lock we'd installed years ago when he was a child afraid of storms. My fingers trembled as the key met the lock. For a moment I hesitated. Then I turned it. The click was soft, but it thundered through me. The door opened half an inch before catching on something heavy. I pushed gently, enough to make space. The smell hit me first, a mix of old paper, metal, and that same lavender perfume. The curtains were drawn tight, shutting out most of the light, but the thin slit that escaped between them illuminated a scene that made my knees weaken. A chair sat in the center of the room, facing a desk that wasn't there before. On it lay a laptop, its screen black, and beside it a small speaker still humming faintly. Cables snaked across the floor, leading to what looked like voice recorders, dozens of them, small ones, stacked neatly, each labeled with a date written in my handwriting. My handwriting. I stepped closer, heart hammering. The sound of my own breathing filled the room. The walls were lined with shelves, and on those shelves were tapes, flash drives, memory cards, everyone marked with a different month, a different year. I recognized the boxes. They were the ones I'd used to store old family videos in the attic. I picked one up, fingers trembling, and pressed play. The crackle of static filled the room, followed by my voice. Soft, ordinary, warm. Breakfast's ready. Don't forget your jacket. My chest tightened. The next tape. Happy birthday, sweetheart. The next. I'm proud of you. My hands shook so badly I dropped it. The voice continued to play from the floor, looping quietly, my words echoing back at me like ghosts of kindness trapped in plastic. I looked toward the far corner. A small table held photographs, dozens of them. Me standing in the kitchen, sitting in the garden, folding clothes, watering plants. Some were printed. Others were frozen stills from video clips. Every angle of my life captured, cataloged. And then I saw it. The small camera perched on a tripod near the bookshelf pointed toward the door. Its red light blinked once, recording. I stood frozen, the air thick around me. My mind raced, searching for reason. Was this obsession? Grief? Loneliness? Or something darker? I walked to the desk and opened the laptop. The screen flickered, waking from sleep. A folder sat open, named Her Voice. Inside it were hundreds of audio files, each named by date. The most recent one was from last night. I clicked it. There it was again, my voice soft but hollow, saying the same 3 words. I love you. Tears blurred my vision. My hands hovered over the keyboard, unable to move. He hadn't just recorded me. He'd built a room out of my echoes, a shrine of sound. He'd captured the fragments of our life together and turned them into company for his loneliness. For a moment, anger sparked. Sharp, cold, alive. But it vanished as quickly as it came. In its place grew something heavier. Sorrow. I sat in the chair and listened to one of the older recordings. My voice was brighter there, younger, full of laughter I barely remembered. He must have collected these over years, maybe even before his father died. Each file was a day I'd forgotten, but he hadn't. Then I noticed something else. Beneath one of the recorders, a small notebook. I opened it. His handwriting filled every page, neat and deliberate. Sometimes she talks to herself when she's cooking. I record those. They calm me down. When I can't sleep, I play her voice saying my name. She doesn't know how quiet the house feels when she's gone. The words blurred. My chest ached. Every entry was dated, each one a moment of pain he hadn't shared. The first entry was months after his father's funeral. He hadn't been hiding a stranger. He'd been hiding grief. The voice upstairs wasn't haunting us. It was trying to keep him from forgetting. I sat there for a long time, surrounded by the hum of machines and the ghosts of my own voice. The anger softened, replaced by a dull ache that settled deep. He had built this place not out of cruelty, but out of fear. Fear that one day I'd vanish too, that silence would replace the only sound that ever comforted him. I reached for one of the recorders, the one nearest the edge of the desk. My fingers brushed the button accidentally, and my voice spoke again. Older this time, tired but gentle. "Everything's going to be all right." The words hit me like a prayer from the past. I pressed stop. The room fell silent. For a moment, I thought I heard movement downstairs, the soft groan of the floor, maybe the wind shifting through the open window. I stood quickly, gathered the nearest few tapes, and placed them in my apron pocket. I didn't know why. Maybe I needed proof. Maybe I just couldn't leave them there. Before I left, I took one last look around. The walls seemed closer now, the air heavier. My photographs watched me from every corner. I reached for the curtains and pulled them open. Sunlight flooded in. Dust rose in the beams like tiny ghosts fleeing the light. The room changed instantly. It wasn't mysterious anymore. It was sad. Just sad. On the desk, a small frame sat half hidden under a pile of cables. I lifted it. Inside was a picture of me and him, taken years ago at Forsyth Park, both of us laughing under a sky full of Spanish moss. The edges of the photo were worn from being held too often. I set it back down carefully. Then I turned off the recorder, unplugged the wires, and shut the door behind me. Downstairs, the house felt lighter, as if it too had been holding its breath. I placed the tapes gently on the table and sat beside them. My hands shook as I poured a cup of coffee. It was still early. The sunlight through the kitchen window painted gold stripes across the floor. I stared at the tapes and whispered, not to anyone, just to the air. He wasn't hiding from me. He was hiding inside me. When he returned that evening, he found me sitting in the same spot. The tapes lay between us like a bridge made of truth. He froze, eyes wide, understanding instantly what I'd done. His lips parted, but no sound came out. I could see the fear there, but not the fear of being caught. It was the fear of being seen. He sat slowly, his hands trembling. I said nothing. Neither did he. The silence filled every corner of the room. Finally, he looked at the tapes and whispered a word I'd never heard him say before. "Sorry." His voice cracked on it, like it was made of glass. I didn't answer. Not yet. There would be time for that. That night, after he went to bed, I placed all the recorders in a box and locked it away. I didn't destroy them. Some things, even painful things, deserve to exist as reminders. When I turned off the lights, the house was quiet again. But it was a clean quiet, not the kind that hides things. For the first time in months, the silence sounded like peace. That night, after I had found his recordings and seen the fragments of our life spread across that room, I didn't sleep. The moonlight came through the curtains in long stripes, falling across the floor like pale rivers. The air felt lighter now, but my chest still hurt. I sat at the kitchen table, the box of recorders beside me, listening to the tick of the clock and the faint hum of the refrigerator. Every sound in the house seemed different, quieter, gentler, like the house itself knew its secret had finally been told. I thought about all the weeks I had spent scared of ghosts, scared of shadows, scared of my own voice echoing back at me. And yet the truth was simpler, sadder, more human. My son hadn't built a prison. He had built a refuge, a strange, lonely refuge made of sound. He was afraid of forgetting me, afraid of losing the voice that once carried him through every dark thing in life. In that stillness, I began to remember the boy he had been. I saw him at 5 years old, running barefoot across the backyard with his father's hat slipping over his eyes. I saw him at 12, hiding behind the porch steps after scraping his knee, whispering that he didn't want to grow up. I heard his laughter again, the same laugh that used to echo through these walls. Somewhere between those years and this night, that laughter had turned into silence. I went back to the day his father died. The memory rose like a tide I'd tried to hold back for too long. We'd stood by the hospital window, the machines still humming in the background, and he had asked me if we would ever sound the same again. I didn't understand then what he meant, but I see it now. He wasn't asking about grief. He was asking about silence, about the emptiness that follows after a voice disappears. After the funeral, he had changed in small ways first. He started wearing headphones to bed, said they helped him sleep. He recorded conversations without reason, birthdays, holidays, dinners. I'd teased him once, asking if he planned to make a documentary about us. He'd smiled, said something about memory being fragile. I never realized how literal that would become. I went upstairs again the next morning, this time without fear. The sunlight poured through the curtains I'd left open the day before, cutting across the room in gold stripes. Dust floated in the air like tiny worlds turning in slow motion. The silence was deep, but not heavy anymore. It felt like a quiet apology. I sat down at the desk where all those recorders had been and touched one of the empty shelves. My fingertips came away gray with dust. I could still smell the faint trace of lavender, but beneath it now was the scent of wood and warmth. Human things. Living things. I pressed play on one of the tapes I had brought down the night before. The speaker crackled, and then my voice filled the air again. Only this time, I listened differently. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I listened the way one listens to an echo in a canyon, not as something haunting, but as something returned. It was an ordinary moment, a recording of me reading a grocery list, of all things. My voice calm, a little tired, reciting apples, milk, rice, detergent. I laughed softly at how simple it sounded, how mundane. But halfway through, I heard him in the background. His younger voice, clear and steady, saying, "Don't forget cereal." That broke me in a different way. It reminded me that every piece of sound he'd kept wasn't just about me. It was about us. Each one was a piece of life he was terrified of losing. He wasn't crazy. He was grieving the only way he knew how, by holding onto the echoes. I turned off the tape and sat still for a long time. The birds outside were loud that morning, singing somewhere near the magnolia tree. Their calls mingled with the hum of the city waking up beyond the window. For the first time in months, the world felt connected again, one sound flowing into another, like forgiveness, learning how to breathe. I went back to my room and opened the old chest that held his father's things. The scent of cedar rushed out, the same scent that always followed him. Inside were letters, photographs, a few tools, and his wristwatch, the one that had stopped the day he died. I picked it up, ran my thumb over its cold face, and felt the old ache return. I remembered how my husband used to hum the same tune every night before bed, the one our son would mimic just to make him laugh. That was when I understood the last piece of it, the humming I'd heard at night, the one that had made my blood run cold. It wasn't random. It was the same tune. My son had been replaying the sound of his father's habit over and over, trying to bring him back through repetition. It was grief repeating itself through technology. It was heartbreak disguised as haunting. I took the watch downstairs and placed it next to the tapes on the kitchen table. For a long time, I just looked at the two of them, one that had measured time, the other that had captured it. Both had stopped in their own way. Both had been ways of holding on. When he came home that evening, the sun was setting behind the oaks, painting the sky in gold and orange. He walked in quietly, head bowed, and froze when he saw me sitting there. The box of tapes, the watch, the open notebook, all waiting like an unfinished conversation. He didn't speak first. He just stood there, shoulders heavy, eyes red. Then slowly, he sat across from me. His hands fidgeted on the table, restless, lost. He whispered that he didn't mean to scare me, that he hadn't realized how strange it had become, that he just wanted to keep me close. His words stumbled, broke apart. Then came silence again. I told him I wasn't angry. My voice surprised me. It was steady, calm. I said that grief doesn't make sense, that loneliness can twist even love into strange shapes. I told him that I had been afraid, yes, but not of him. I was afraid of what grief had done to us both. He looked at me then, really looked, and I saw it. The boy he used to be, the one who once clung to my dress after nightmares. The same eyes, the same silent plea for comfort. I reached across the table and took his hands. They were cold, trembling. I told him that voices are meant to be heard, not kept, that memories should breathe, that I was still here, still alive, and he didn't have to trap my words inside machines to keep me near. He cried quietly, his shoulders shaking, his hands gripping mine like a drowning man holding onto a rope. I let him cry. Some grief can't be fixed. It only needs space to exist without shame. When the tears stopped, he looked at the tapes again and asked what I wanted to do with them. I said nothing. Instead, I stood up, walked to the back door, and opened it. The evening air rushed in, carrying the sound of cicadas and wind through the trees. I told him we'd decide together. We spent the rest of that night outside, sitting on the porch, listening to real sounds, the kind that don't replay. The crickets, the rustle of leaves, the faraway hum of a passing car. For the first time in years, we sat without filling the air with words or recordings, just breathing, just being. Later, I brought out an old portable radio. It still worked, though static crackled between songs. I turned the dial until we found a slow, old melody, something from the 60s, the kind my husband used to play while painting the porch. We listened in silence. My son leaned back in the chair, eyes closed, face turned toward the breeze. I saw his shoulders relax, the tension finally draining out. That moment felt holy in its simplicity. The sound of the radio, the smell of wet grass, the faint taste of salt in the air. It was as if the world itself had taken a deep breath after months of holding it. When the song ended, he looked at me and said quietly that he would delete the recordings. I shook my head. Not all, I told him. Keep one. Just one. Not as a crutch, but as a memory. He nodded slowly, eyes glistening again. The next morning, I woke to the sound of movement upstairs. My heart skipped once, then calmed when I remembered everything. I walked up slowly, the floorboards warm under my bare feet. The door was open this time. The desk was clean. The wires were gone. Only one tape remained on the shelf. He'd left a note beside it, folded neatly. I kept the one where you laughed. It makes the house sound alive again. I smiled through tears I didn't bother to wipe away. I took the note downstairs and placed it beside the watch. Then I made coffee and sat by the window. The morning light came soft and golden, and the house finally felt like home again. Not haunted, not hollow, just quiet in the right way. The truth had changed everything, but it had also healed something deeper. He hadn't been trying to imitate me. He'd been trying to remember love in a world that kept taking it away. And in that understanding, I forgave him, not because he asked for it, but because I finally saw the child inside the man who couldn't bear to lose one more sound of the people he loved. That was the day silence stopped frightening me. It became something sacred instead, because silence, when understood, is just love resting its voice. Evening slid over Savannah like smoke, thick and slow, pressing gold against the river before turning it black. Inside the house, the light dimmed, and the air felt heavy again, the kind that carries unspoken things. I sat at the kitchen table, the last of the sunlight cutting through the lace curtain, landing across the tapes I'd left there. The clock ticked behind me, steady as a pulse. I'd been waiting for him since late afternoon, every second a tiny weight on my chest. When his car finally pulled into the driveway, the sound was softer than usual, as if he'd already decided to tread lightly. The door opened, then closed again. His steps on the porch boards paused before the handle turned. For a brief moment, I thought he might walk away and never come in. Then the latch clicked, and he entered. He froze when he saw the table. The box of tapes was open, his notebook lay beside it, and the small voice recorder rested on top, the red light blinking faintly. His eyes widened, then fell to the floor. The silence between us filled the room like water filling a glass. He tried to speak once but stopped, his mouth shaping words that didn't arrive. He swallowed hard, hands curling into fists, then releasing. I said nothing. My gaze didn't leave his face, the face that looked so much like his father's when guilt first touched it. He finally whispered something low, a confession wrapped in apology. His voice cracked halfway through the first sentence. He said he hadn't meant for it to go so far, that after his father's death, the house had felt like an empty museum, that my voice was the only thing that kept him from drowning in silence. He spoke fast at first, words tumbling over one another. He told me he began recording small things, me humming, reading recipes, closing cupboards, because it gave him proof that life was still happening. He said he'd play them late at night when the air felt too thick to breathe. But then he started recording more, copying the files, organizing them, layering them over each other until the sound filled the room like presence. He wiped his face roughly with both hands. Tears left pale tracks down the dust on his skin. He looked smaller somehow, not in size, but in spirit, the way a man shrinks when the truth no longer hides him. He told me he never wanted me to find out, that he feared I'd think him broken, that every time I laughed downstairs he wanted to keep it, trap it before it vanished into the air. The first time he played it back, he felt peace. The 100th time, he felt hollow. As he spoke, I realized the depth of his loneliness. It wasn't madness. It was mourning. He'd been living inside an echo chamber of comfort, trying to rebuild a world that grief had burned down. I reached for the recorder and pressed play. My own voice filled the room again, gentle, ordinary. I could hear the way I used to talk to him, soft, patient, sure. The sound of the kettle boiling in the background, the faint scrape of a chair. Everyday ghosts. He broke again at that. He covered his face, shoulders shaking. His sobs came in uneven gasps, muffled behind trembling hands. I didn't interrupt. Grief has its own rhythm. To touch it too soon is to silence it. When he finally lifted his head, his eyes were red but steady. He said he knew it was wrong, that hiding it had turned love into something sick. He said he wanted to stop, but every time he deleted a file, it felt like losing me. He said he was terrified of waking up one day and not remembering how I sounded when I said his name. Those words broke something inside me that anger never could, because I remembered that fear, too. The fear of forgetting the way my husband laughed, the sound of his footsteps on the porch, the rough warmth of his voice calling from the yard. I had lost those sounds once. My son had only been trying to keep what time steals from everyone. The air shifted between us. It wasn't tense anymore. It was heavy with understanding. I told him quietly that remembering isn't wrong, but building a prison out of memory is. I told him he didn't need to guard my voice like a secret. I was still here, breathing, alive, ready to speak. He didn't have to record me to keep me close. He only had to listen when I was near. He nodded slowly, but the tears returned. He said he hadn't known how to stop, that each night the silence grew louder, begging for noise. He said the recordings made him feel safe because they obeyed him. They didn't leave, didn't argue, didn't die. I understood that too well. People cling to things that stay still. We sat there for a long time, the night pressing its ear against the windows. The city hum outside softened, and the only sounds left were our breathing and the faint buzz of the refrigerator. Then he reached across the table, his hands trembling, and took mine. His skin was cold, his grip unsure. He whispered that he was sorry for scaring me, sorry for turning grief into obsession, sorry for not trusting that love survives, even in silence. I squeezed his hand back, not as forgiveness, but as grounding, a reminder that the present still existed. He said he wanted to fix it, to make it right, that he'd delete everything, dismantle the wires, open the curtains, and bring the room back to life. But I told him to wait. I told him not to destroy the evidence of pain, because pain deserves to be remembered too. It teaches, it warns, it humbles. He didn't understand at first, but he nodded anyway. We sat together until the first hints of dawn touched the window. The night had drained us both, but something in the air felt cleaner now. The ghosts had names again, and none of them were monsters. They were memories, misunderstood but forgiven. When the clock struck 6, I stood and began making coffee. The familiar hiss of the kettle filled the kitchen. The smell of roasted beans drifted through the room. For the first time in months, he smiled faintly, a real smile, shy and tired. He said he'd missed that sound, the whistle of the kettle, the clink of mugs, the shuffle of my slippers on the floor. He said it made the house feel alive. I told him those sounds were free. He didn't need to trap them anymore. After breakfast, we went upstairs together. The room looked different in daylight, less like a secret, more like a wound healing in fresh air. He began disconnecting wires while I gathered the tapes into neat stacks. Each one clicked softly as it slid into the box, the sound almost like punctuation marks closing a chapter. When he pulled the last cord from the wall, the small speaker gave one final static sigh before falling silent. The quiet that followed was pure, not heavy, not haunted, just still. He looked around and said he hadn't realized how dark the room had become until now. I told him that's what grief does. It closes curtains, blocks light, and convinces you it's protecting you from pain. But the truth is, light doesn't hurt you. It just shows you what's already there. He nodded, and together we opened the windows. The morning air rushed in, carrying the scent of rain and magnolia. The curtains fluttered like lungs taking their first full breath. He stood there for a long time, looking out, eyes wet, but calm. He said he felt lighter. I told him that's what happens when you let silence belong to itself again. Before we left the room, he turned to me and whispered that he'd never wanted me to hear those recordings because he thought they'd make me sad. I told him that sadness isn't the enemy of love. Forgetting is. Downstairs, he poured himself another coffee, hands steady now. The house felt different. The walls seemed to exhale. Even the floorboards under our feet sounded warmer. We sat again at the same table, the morning sunlight slipping in through the blinds, touching the box of tapes like forgiveness resting in wood. He looked at me and said softly that he wanted to make a new recording, one with both of us in it, not hidden, not secret. I nodded. He took out his phone, pressed record, and said, "Tell me something to keep." I thought for a moment, then said, "You don't need to keep me. You just need to live loudly enough to remember." He smiled through another wave of tears, and for the first time since his father's death, laughter escaped him. Not forced, not broken, but real. The sound filled the room like sunlight. That was his confession, and that was his release. The tapes no longer echoed with fear. They hummed with understanding. And for the first time, our silence wasn't a wall between us. It was a bridge. The morning after his confession came bright and calm, the kind of Savannah morning that smells of salt and jasmine, when the air hums with birds and forgiveness. Sunlight streamed through the sheer curtains, spreading soft gold across the kitchen walls. For the first time in months, the house felt alive. No tension in the corners, no hidden electricity in the air, just warmth. The kettle whistled quietly, steady as breath. He came downstairs late, hair tousled, eyes tired but clearer than I had ever seen them. The heaviness that had once lived behind his gaze seemed to have loosened. He paused at the doorway, almost uncertain whether he was welcome. I turned, smiled faintly, and poured him a cup of coffee. We didn't speak at first. Some mornings don't need words. They only need the proof of presence. The silence was no longer dangerous. It had changed shape overnight. It was the silence of people rebuilding something fragile, one slow minute at a time. He sat down across from me, the same seat where he had confessed, and we both stared at the box of tapes still resting on the counter. They didn't look haunting anymore. They looked like artifacts, evidence of survival. He said softly that he wanted to clean the upstairs room completely, to start fresh. I nodded. I told him we would do it together, because healing that starts alone often ends halfway. So after breakfast, we went upstairs. The door was open. The sunlight was waiting, pouring through the window like new life. We began with the cables, pulling, coiling, sorting. Each cord that came loose felt like untangling a knot inside both of us. The small speaker popped once and died. The sound was final, like a page closing. Then came the tapes, hundreds of them stacked neatly. I lifted each one gently, wiping the dust from its surface. The labels he'd written, dates, small notes, were tiny windows into lonely nights. He watched me, quiet, eyes flicking between my face and the tapes. I could see guilt in his shoulders, like he was waiting for me to scold him, to remind him of the madness of it all. But I didn't. Instead, I began humming softly, the same tune his father used to hum while fixing the porch lamp. His eyes widened. Then slowly, he joined in. Our voices wove together, rough and imperfect, but whole. When the last cable was boxed and the floor swept clean, the room looked bare, almost innocent again. The walls breathed. The air moved. We opened the windows wider and let the warm wind in. The curtains fluttered like they had been waiting to dance. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, a faint smile tugging at his mouth. He said it felt like the house was watching us forgive it. I laughed quietly. Maybe it was. Maybe homes carry their own memory of love and pain, and all they ever want is to be forgiven too. We carried the boxes downstairs and placed them by the door. The sun caught the old metal latch and gleamed. He asked what I wanted to do with them. I said I'd think about it. For now, they could stay. Sometimes healing isn't about throwing things away. It's about learning to live beside what hurt you. That evening, we sat on the porch again. The magnolia trees shimmered in the dusk, and the air smelled of rain. The world outside was noisy, cars, laughter, a passing train, but it didn't intrude. We had our own quiet rhythm now. He told me he wanted to record something new, but this time, not secretly. Something real. A fresh start. I nodded. He brought out his small, hand-held recorder, the same one that had once trapped my voice in shadows, and placed it between us on the table. The red light blinked. I said nothing at first. Then I told him to start by saying his name, his story, his truth. He hesitated, then began talking, slowly, honestly, about loss, loneliness, fear, and the strange comfort of pretending someone was still there. He spoke not like a confession this time, but like a release. His words were steady, his breathing calm. When he finished, he handed the recorder to me. I looked at it for a long moment before pressing the button. My voice filled the night air. This is my son. He was lost in the dark, but he found his way home. That was all I said. Then I stopped the recording. We sat in silence again, listening to the frogs by the marsh and the distant hum of the city. He said it felt different now. The red light didn't look sinister anymore. It looked warm, alive. Over the next few days, life returned slowly, like color seeping back into an old photograph. We began cooking together again. I taught him to bake the bread his father used to love. He taught me how to use his coffee grinder properly. Small, ordinary things. But each one was a bridge across what grief had broken. He stopped closing his door upstairs. Sometimes I'd walk by and hear music playing softly. Real music, not my voice. Jazz, blues, sometimes nothing at all. The house learned new sounds, kinder sounds. One afternoon, we visited Forsyth Park, the same place from that old photograph I'd found in his hidden room. The fountains glistened under the sun, and children ran through the spray, laughter filling the air. We sat on a bench beneath the oak trees, Spanish moss swaying gently above. He told me he'd started therapy at a local clinic. I nodded, proud without saying it. Healing doesn't need applause. It only needs continuation. When we returned home that evening, he asked if he could repaint the upstairs room. I told him yes, on one condition, that he choose a bright color. He picked sky blue. The next morning, we painted together. The scent of fresh paint mixed with the breeze through the window, and it felt like sealing something old, opening something new. As the weeks passed, our conversations changed. They were lighter now. He started telling me stories about work, about colleagues, about a neighbor who brought him pies on Sundays. The heaviness in his tone was gone. When he laughed, it didn't sound like memory. It sounded like present. One night, I caught him recording again. But this time, he wasn't hiding. He was sitting at the table with the recorder in plain view, describing the smell of rain and the way the streetlights hit the wet pavement. He smiled when he saw me watching. He said, "I'm recording life now, not loss." That was when I realized we had both healed. Not because the pain vanished, but because we'd given it a home that wasn't secret. I still keep one of the tapes in the kitchen drawer. Not to listen, just to remember. It sits beside my husband's repaired watch, ticking softly again. Some mornings, when the house is especially quiet, I open the drawer and let the sound remind me that love leaves traces in everything it touches: air, metal, wood, time. The room upstairs is now a study. He works there sometimes, sunlight falling across his papers, window open, music low. Sometimes, when I pass by, I still hear echoes of my own voice. Real ones this time, calling him for dinner or asking about his day. He always answers. And that, more than anything, is what healing sounds like. It's not the absence of sorrow. It's the return of response. Weeks passed and the air of Savannah softened into spring. The trees turned greener, the evenings grew longer, and the magnolias bloomed again, white petals opening like forgiveness under the sun. Life moved in small, steady circles, quiet but meaningful. The house, once heavy with fear, now hummed with ordinary sounds: the clatter of dishes, the creak of stairs, the faint hum of a radio playing somewhere distant. One morning, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the light move across the lawn. The breeze carried the faint smell of salt from the river and the chatter of early walkers passing by. Inside, my son was upstairs working. The faint tap of his keyboard drifted down the hall. The same room that once held his loneliness now held his healing. I looked at the repaired watch on my wrist, my husband's old one, now ticking again after years of silence. Its steady rhythm matched the calm inside me. Time had always been the quiet teacher of my life, showing me that love and pain often travel side by side. That lesson had never been louder than in these months. I thought of the night I first heard my own voice echoing from upstairs. The fear, the confusion, the dread of something unnatural. Now, looking back, I realized that what had scared me most wasn't the sound itself. It was the reflection. Hearing yourself from somewhere else forces you to face everything you've tried to bury. That voice had never been a ghost. It was grief, wearing my tone. I breathed in the morning air and felt a deep, quiet pride. I had survived not through shouting or anger, but through patience. I had learned that sometimes revenge isn't about breaking people. It's about showing them the truth they're too afraid to see. My son hadn't needed punishment. He needed understanding. The exposure wasn't for the world, it was for his heart. Later that afternoon, he joined me on the porch. He carried 2 glasses of iced tea and set one beside me. The sunlight hit the rim and threw a spark of light across the wooden railing. We sat in easy silence, listening to the world move around us. He looked healthier now. His voice, when he finally spoke, had lost its tremor. He told me he'd been accepted to teach part-time at the local community center, helping veterans and seniors record their stories. He smiled softly as he said it, and I realized that maybe the very thing that once consumed him, the need to preserve voices, had found a gentler purpose. He wasn't recording ghosts anymore. He was keeping people alive in memory. I told him that was good work. Work that heals not only others, but the one who listens. He nodded, and his eyes grew glassy. For a moment, I saw the boy he had once been, the one who used to sit by my feet and hum while I read. He reached over and squeezed my hand, and that simple gesture said everything words never could. As the sun lowered, he went back inside. I stayed, watching the light fade and the first fireflies appear. The porch light flickered on, casting a soft glow on the white railing. In that half-light, I found myself whispering, not in sadness, but in gratitude. I whispered to the air, to the ghosts of sound and silence, to the years that had tried to break us. I said thank you, for every fear that became understanding, for every silence that turned into peace. Inside the house, the faint sound of his laughter drifted through the open window. It was real, full, unafraid. I smiled, and in that sound, I felt years of weight lift off my chest. That night, before bed, I opened the drawer in the kitchen. Inside were two things, my husband's watch and one cassette tape, the only one we decided to keep. I lifted it carefully. On the label, written in his small, neat handwriting, were the words, "Her laugh, June." I placed it in the small player, pressed play, and waited. The tape hissed for a moment, then came to life. My laugh filled the room, bright and surprised, followed by his soft chuckle in the background. For a few seconds, time folded back on itself. The past and present touched hands. I let it play once, then pressed stop. I didn't need to hear it again. Some memories are strongest when left sleeping. Before turning off the light, I looked around the kitchen one last time. The house had become what it was always meant to be, not a museum of loss, but a living place of warmth and truth. It no longer echoed. It sang quietly. I went to bed that night, knowing that pain doesn't end when you understand it. It changes shape. It becomes gentler, like wind brushing over water. It leaves room for grace. The next morning, we visited the riverfront. The city shimmered in the distance, sunlight bouncing off the water. Tourists walked by with cameras and laughter, but I only heard the rhythm of the tide. My son took a picture of me sitting on the bench, the same spot where his father and I once sat decades ago. He said he wanted to keep it, not to frame grief, but to celebrate peace. On the way home, he asked me a question. He wanted to know how I forgave so easily. I told him forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing not to carry the heavy parts anymore. I told him that love, when kept honest, is the strongest kind of revenge, because it leaves no bitterness for anyone to feed on. That night, I wrote in my journal for the first time in years. I wrote about the sound of my own voice, the discovery of fear that turned into love, the way healing feels when it finally arrives. I wrote until my hand hurt, until the words became slower, softer. Then I stopped, closed the book, and placed it beside my bed. Before I turned off the lamp, I whispered one last thought. We don't lose people to silence. We lose them when we stop listening. Weeks later, the story of that night, the recordings, the fear, the forgiveness, became something I shared with other women at the church. Some cried, some nodded, some smiled. Every one of them understood the part where love hurts too deeply to recognize itself. Every one of them knew what it means to hear your own heart echo back to you in the dark. Now, when I walk through this house, I sometimes stop by the stairs where it all began, the place where he told me not to come up, the place where my fear was born and then undone. I touch the rail, feel the wood smooth under my fingers, and breathe in slow. The air doesn't feel heavy anymore. It feels like home. I've learned that love is not always gentle. Sometimes it teaches through fear, sometimes through heartbreak. But when truth comes, even through pain, it leaves peace in its wake. So I leave you with this. I thought I had heard a ghost that night. I thought the house was haunted by something cruel. But what I really heard was love, crying out to be understood. If you ever find yourself hearing your own voice from somewhere you didn't expect, don't run. Don't be afraid. Listen. It might be your heart asking to be remembered. Tell me, if you heard your voice calling from upstairs, would you climb or would you stay where it's safe? Because sometimes facing what you fear is the only way to bring silence back to peace.